Somehow the paramedics are guilty in killing Elijah, but not the cops who held him down while the paramedics injected him. If this was regular people doing this, the people holding down the person would also be considered criminally guilty of killing the person. But because it's cops, they got away with it.
A jury has found two paramedics guilty of negligent homicide in the 2019 death of Elijah McClain. The two men injected McClain with what ended up being a fatal dose of ketamine while police subdued him. McClain, an unarmed black man, was confronted in Aurora, Colorado, after a suspicious person said he made a call, and that got to police. Only one.
Yeah, if this wasn't because of the police escalating the incident with Elijah, the paramedics wouldn't have been there. So the cops are criminally liable for this. They were choking him before the cops injected him.
One of three officers involved were found guilty. Let's bring in CBS News legal contributor and law professor Jessica Levinson. Jessica, it took the jury only 2 days to.
Okay, the other two cops should be found guilty as well. It's wild that one cop was found guilty, but not the other two who was also involved.
Reach this verdict. Was that expected?
It's always difficult to gauge what a jury is going to do, but what they did is they found guilt on the lesser included charge of criminal negligence here. It's almost always included in a manslaughter charge. And what we have here is the jury saying that both paramedics should have perceived that there would be a substantial risk of death as a result of the actions that they took, and that a reasonable person would have perceived that risk.
I mean, paramedics shouldn't be injecting people with drugs after the cops have choked and beaten them.
It's the Friday before the holiday weekend. Do you think that played a factor in how quickly the jury came to a decision?
Absolutely. And I think this is not unusual. A lot of times you do see verdicts on Friday afternoons because jurors don't want to come back. Add on to that the fact that we're going into a holiday weekend. It doesn't mean the jury didn't do its job. It means that they had extra motivation to do that job quickly.
Okay, one officer was convicted, others were acquitted. What happens next in this case? Are we looking at years of appeals, potentially?
So we are, I think, potentially looking at appeals. There were some questions as to whether or not, for instance, the officers followed.
How can they appeal? They murdered a dude. What are they gonna do? Appeal and say they didn't murder a dude?
Or the paramedics followed the protocols. But the jury did find, based on the allegations here, that there was guilt. The one thing that I want to point out to everybody is that this is very unusual. It's unusual to charge police officers in these types of situations, but it's extremely unusual to charge paramedics. Usually they.
It should become usual where society charges cops for murdering people. They shouldn't be able to get away with murder just because of some made up thing called qualified immunity, where cops get to murder people because it's somehow their job. I mean, it's not the job of a doctor to murder people. When they do that, there is no qualified immunity for them. They go to jail.
Have some sort of immunity and they can say, look, I was acting according to my training and my protocols. So what we have here is not an absolute first, but we have a rare circumstance in which the paramedics were charged and found guilty. I think the jury.
Yeah, it shouldn't be, a cop shouldn't be able to say, this is part of my training to murder a person, so I shouldn't be charged for murder.
Really was not buying the defense argument here that they were just acting like reasonable people would have under the circumstances.
So let's just take that a step further. I think what I'm hearing you say is that the paramedics were seen by the jury as a group that should have had the kind of knowledge to know that that level of ketamine, that level of injecting the drug would have had the potential to sedate him to death. I mean, that's what happened in this case.
It's wild how ketamine was illegal, and now paramedics are allowed to just randomly inject people with ketamine just because the cops have choked and beaten them.
That's exactly what happened. They also put him in a specific type of hold that was meant to cut off blood flow to the brain. I think what the jury found.
Which, when you cut off blood flow to the brain, that can cause a person to also die. So why is it okay for cops to kill people just to subdue them?
Frankly, is an overreaction to a situation. We know that Mr. McClain was not engaged in any criminal activity, that there was a phone call that somebody said she thought she saw something, I believe something sketchy, that the police.
Yeah, it was just a chick that saw a dude walking, didn't like seeing a dude walking, so they called the cops, and the cops and the paramedic killed him. He was killed for walking while black.
Officers responded and that the situation quickly escalated. And I believe that part of this verdict is a representation of where we are now when it comes to how police officers and even paramedics respond to these types of calls. I don't know that this would have been the verdict.
Well, when a cop, interacts with an unarmed person that is walking, they should just let them continue walking instead of choking them.
Maybe 5 or 10 years ago.
That's an excellent point. Could there be civil charges in this case?
There could be civil charges in this case. It's unusual that you would bring these criminal charges. So you could absolutely see a plaintiff's attorney try to style these also as civil charges for a wrongful death suit. And I know that Mr. McClain's mother has been very aggressive in trying to obtain justice for her son. And so, yes, the criminal charges may